Friday we left off, I believe, with the brush tool, and I was just telling you how you could change your brush size with the bracket keys, and you could also go up here to the second bar, which is the tool option bar. You can also change the size with this slider. You can also change the shape by clicking inside here. You see that? I'm doing more of like an elliptical sized brush. Um, you can rotate stuff around if you need to. There's also a lot of uh, custom brushes and things that you can try and download. There are like lots of special effects brushes. You can actually buy brush sets and install them. Not that you need to do that, but if you click on this little gear icon here, this is where you can go in and import brushes that you have loaded and bought. Lots of really experienced artists uh, actually use a lot of these custom brushes for to have get different effects. But that's way beyond what you need to do. All right, bundled with the brush tool is the pencil tool, which basically works the same way, except there's nothing anti-aliased. Um, Remember the other day I was telling you how you could get like a soft edge, like that almost looks like an airbrush with your brush. So if I go in here let's go back to the brush tool to quickly demonstrate. Remember, bracket keys are next to the P key, and that makes it bigger or smaller. See how soft and fuzzy that edge is? Now if I switch over to the pencil tool, see that? Hard versus soft. So that's all that does. Now notice before I started drawing anything on here, I created a new layer. So now I can simply, if I need to, turn that layer off, but I don't need it at all. So I'm going to drag it down to the trash icon. Oops, I got to turn it back on first. Drag it down to the trash, get rid of it. Okay, I have opened up a new template, fresh template. I deleted everything from Friday. So, does anyone remember what the first step I need to do is before I really do anything to this? Nope. Almost. That's that's close, but before I do that, what do I got to do? Yes, thank you. Duplicate the background layer. So you either go up here to this little symbol with the three lines and click duplicate layer, hit OK, or you can go up here to the layer menu and do it that way. Photoshop will tend to put the same information in more than one location to make it easier to access. All right. So now I have my duplicate of my background, and I will turn off the original. Still there, just turning it off, like hiding it so I don't need it. Okay. Now this is a quick review from Friday. Remember, now I have this layer that I want to keep clean, and I will use it for my selections. If I select the magic wand tool, I can click inside any of these shapes and make instant selections. Because remember, the magic wand selects things either based on whether they're enclosed in a border or based on like color information. It'll select whatever is in that area that's the same color that you're clicking on. All right. So when we're doing this, I think it's better to work from, and I mentioned this the other day, work from background to foreground. So before you start putting lots of other elements on here, I think you should probably at least just fill these background areas with color and kind of work from the bottom up. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and just fill in some areas of color to just play with this. Now I've got my area selected, but I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to fill anything on this background layer. I want to leave it blank. So now I'm going to create a new layer right down here. You can also do it up here on this menu or over here on this menu. Now notice I've still got things selected, but I can switch back and forth between, like once I have a selection active, I can go to any other layer I want to. Okay, now whenever I fill something, it's going to go to this new layer, which is what I want. That's an easy step to forget. So now if I simply go up to edit and go to fill, right now it's set to my foreground color, which is currently blue. If I want to change that, I'll simply hit cancel, double click on this color, and change it to a different color, like this yellow. Hit OK. Now notice the blue has turned to yellow. Now if I go to edit fill, it's still set to foreground color. Hit OK. Now those selected areas have been filled with yellow. And that yellow is now on a separate layer. If I decide later that I want to get rid of that, I can simply turn off the layer or drag it in the trash. I hit Control D to deselect. I can also do a gradient, which is basically it combines two colors. The gradient tool is right down here. It's that little box with the little, almost looks like a value scale inside of it. If I click on that, notice how the options change to this little configuration. I want to make sure that, so you've got all these different options. I don't want foreground to transparent, which is what that checkerboard means. I want foreground to background. So when you see the two colors like going diagonally, that's what I want. If at any point I want to change it, again, I can go in, I can double click on this, go to the gradient editor, I can change where the gradient stops and starts. I can change the colors between the two. I can do all kinds of stuff. But I'll leave it at this just for demonstration purposes. Now, if I simply, let me create a new layer. If I simply drag this as is, it's going to cover the whole image. Why did it do that? What didn't I do? Correct, I did not make a selection. So if you don't tell Photoshop where you want it, it's just going to fill the whole thing. So I'm going to go back down to my background copy where my line art is. I'm going to get the magic wand again. I'm going to hold down Shift to do multiple selections. And I'm going to fill both of these sides with a gradient. Now I'm going to go back up to my blank layer that I just made. And by the way, while I'm on the subject, please name your layers. Double click on the where it says layer 2. Call it gradient, call it whatever you want. Hit enter. For layer 1, I'll call that flat color. When you only have a few layers, it's not that big of a deal, but when you have like over 50 layers and they're all just called layer 27, layer 63, layer 94, it gets really confusing. So naming them something that makes sense is a good idea. All right, so now I've got these two sides selected simultaneously. Now if I get the gradient tool and click and drag, let me go back to it. It's going to do both of those sides at the same time. And the gradient is applied based on the direction that you drag in. So if I drag from top to bottom, it's going to fill from top to bottom based on foreground and background. If I go the other way from down to up, it's going to do, the opposite. If I do it diagonally, it'll do it diagonally. Now what's happening here is because I have two selections going on, it's kind of treating all this as almost like a mask, whereas um, it's filling in both of these at the same time, almost like it's in the background. Um, that's why, like, if I do it from side to side here, one looks pink, one looks yellow. That's because the great actual gradient part of this is taking place between the two selections. So just keep that in mind. You could do these one at a time as well. It's up to you. All right, so that's the gradient tool. Now see, we've got something started here. Now it's going to be easier. Once you have some colors selected, once you have a kind of a color scheme or a color harmony in mind, it's going to be easier to start picking things to put on here. And we haven't really gone over color yet. This is the one disadvantage of not doing the painting unit first, is that we haven't really talked about color harmonies. But I have some videos and stuff that I will show you later this week that will help you when you're thinking about color. You just want to think about really what are some main colors from your theme that you might want to utilize and emphasize. Like if I was doing SpongeBob, for example, I would probably go more with blues and more and greens and kind of underwater colors, more cool colors than this. Um, this might be too bright and garish for a certain thing. Um, but if I'm doing something like Batman, this might be okay. The other thing you can keep in mind is that you don't need to necessarily even do a flat color as a background. You can put an image back there. And let me show you what I mean by that. If I go to File, let's go to Open Recent. I should still have some stuff in here that's usable, maybe. Except these are all named really bad names. Yeah, see, that's not going to work. But color-wise, that wouldn't be awful if I were to just get my magic wand, select all the white space, hold down Shift, like I showed you on Friday. Do a select inverse so that it goes from selecting the background to the foreground. Now if I just drag this up into my image, I can start placing elements. And see, now that there's some color back there, I've got something to work with. But let's say I want to put like an image or something back here. I'm going to open up my original folder. I'm going to find something like this explosion's kind of cool. Let's work with this. I'm going to bring this over into Photoshop. All right, let's say I want to make this big explosion my background. I want it to fill up the entire background of like one side of my box. I'm going to need to do something called a paste into. Here's how that works. First, I want to select and copy the image that I want. So I'm going to do Control A, and that means select all. And you see the little, what I call marching ants, little dotted lines that surround the edges when I do Control A. See those? That's how I know I've got my image selected. I'm going to do Control C, and that's going to copy this to the clipboard. The clipboard is basically like a temporary, almost like it's in limbo. It's like temporary memory storage on your computer. So right now this image is stored, so the next time I paste, it's going to paste that. Now I don't want to just paste this because watch what happens. If I just do Control V, now I have my image in here. But if I were to scale this, if I were to go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and try to make this fill up the box, I mean, it sort of works, but I have extra corners here that don't work, and I'm going to have to try to figure out how to delete. I have to select. Now I could take my lasso tool and try to select the corners and then hit delete. I mean, I could do it that way, but it's kind of a pain. Instead of doing it like that, let me drag this down to the trash. Let's try a different way. I still have this copied to my clipboard, okay? Now instead of just doing a paste, I want to do a paste into, where I'm going to actually paste it inside a selection. So I'm going to go back down to my background copy. I'm going to select this face. Now I'm going to go up to Edit and go to Paste Special right here. Then go Paste Into. Now watch what happens. Nothing, because, no, it did it, but you can't see it because if you look over here at where the layer is, it's underneath the gradient. So if I just simply click and hold and drag this layer up above the gradient, there it is. Okay, so that's a good lesson in layer order. Now, if I want to go back and scale this, watch what happens when I just move it around. You see what's happening? It's staying within the border of the box face. So now if I go back to Edit, Transform, Scale, I'm going to hold down Shift to constrain those proportions so that I don't get warping. Down Shift, you get lots of stretching weirdness like that. You don't want that. Hold down Shift and it'll do it. Now see, even though the image is going way past, it's staying within the borders. Now I can move this around a little bit. Okay. Now I can go back and add more more elements on top. See my layer 1 here? Now I can move this thwack down. I can put some logos on top of this. Do you see that? So your background doesn't have to be like a flat color or gradient. It can be an image. The only thing I'm going to warn you about is that sometimes people will get a really cool image from Google or something. They'll stick it on there and then they'll just leave it. And they're thinking, "Oh, that looks really cool. That side's done." Well, honestly, that's plagiarism, right? I can't leave this like this. I didn't make this explosion. I found it on the internet. So if I want to use this, I need to make sure that I'm doing other things to it. I'm adding more elements on top of it. I'm doing something to change it up enough to where I'm still designing it. Does that make sense? Like I will have students every year that literally will just take 4 different images from the internet and put it on 4 different sides of their box and then consider that and then say, okay, I'm done. That was easy. And then they get really bad grades because that's not design. Yes, question. Well, what I'll say is that um, I normally don't have students cite stuff like that. I think it's probably a good idea, but I just want you to be aware of the fact that, this is an Art 1 assignment. We are just doing this to learn about design and learn about Photoshop. But, we're not like going to enter this in an art contest or something. So I'm just more concerned about your own individual learning on this. Um, if you were going to cite this, I mean, if you were going to enter this in something like that, then I would say, yeah, you need to go back and list where these images came from, or if you want to do something similar, try to generate the art yourself. Like, but for the purposes of this, I just wouldn't go overboard, and I would make sure that whatever you do, you add other stuff on top of this. Like now that this is there, I could go back and let's pull up another image here. Well, what I would do, like more like an action pose, like if I just have Batman standing there, that would be kind of weird. But like behind an explosion. So I would probably go back, and if I don't already have one, like try to find something a little more. Like, see, that's kind of cool. Or here's one of Batman already behind an explosion. But again, that's let's take Green Arrow here. Let's open him up. He's back here. See, now go in and select all of this. I got to get in between the arrows here. Select inverse. I either copy and paste him or I drag him over. All right, see now it's starting to, and what I could do too is I could go back to the original layer. I could go to the opacity. I could push it back a little, fade it out, put some other stuff on top of here, some more content. Like I could put something about Green Arrow here. I could put like an activity, like a maze or a word find. You know what I mean? So then I'm starting to actually think about more like design elements. This is just becoming a background element then. But if you make this the main focus of your box, then you're not really designing anything. You see what I'm saying? Okay. That I just wanted to make that point clear. I mean, it looks super cool, but if you didn't do it, you got to really change it up to make it your own. Okay. So, any questions on any of that? That's kind of how you basically will fill the sides of your box either with a regular color fill, a gradient fill, or with a paste special image. Now that you have all these sides, at least with some color, now you can go in and start putting other elements on top and start making these things match your sketches, which you will need to have, okay, before you start this. All right, so let's keep moving down the toolbar here. The next tool on the toolbar is the clone stamp. And this is a pretty cool little thing that's really there to, it works better on big images. Like, for example, let's zoom in here and go back to this explosion. And this will be a good example here. All right, the clone stamp basically samples parts of the image or the layer and just replicates them in another part. So let's say you have an image where you either want to take something out of it or you want to edit it. Like let's say I want to add another one of these little fire blast things in my image. I could try to select this and copy and paste it, or I can use the clone stamp. Let me bring this back up to 100% opacity. All right, watch what happens when I hit the Alt key. You see how the cursor changes from my brush to a little crosshair? That means this is ready to start sampling from an area. So I'm going to click in here. Now watch what happens. You see when I move this, see what's appearing inside the brush? The area that I sampled from. So now if I left click again and start painting, it is now copying and you can see here, if you look above the cursor, there's that little plus sign that's moving along with my cursor. See that? That's telling me where I'm sampling from. At any point, I can hold down Alt, click from a different area, and resample from another section. All right. So basically, this is good for certain things, but there are times when, you know, it's going to be easier to just duplicate a layer or do some other thing. This is good, like let's say you had an underwater scene and you had a couple of bubbles and you wanted to make more bubbles. You could clone stamp one of the bubbles and multiply it and quickly go in and add more bubbles or add more grass to a field or something. Okay? Or you could, you know, let's move up to our green arrow layer. Actually, this is the tool that you use like when you want to like get rid of like pimples on a person's face, like in fashion design magazines, they use the clone stamp. You know, I can go in here and if I want to get really weird with it, uh, I could. Or like I could like give him an extra finger on his hand, like right there. Yeah, or an extra eye or something. Right, so now he has an extra finger or something. You know, like there's all kinds of weird stuff you can do with it. So it has limited uses, but the uses that it does have are kind of cool. So that's basically the clone stamp. All right, the next one down is it's bundled with the pattern stamp, but you don't need to worry about that. History brush tool. It basically will restore an image, part of an image to an earlier state. So if you have gone in and changed something and you don't like it, you can go back and bring back the original part of it if you haven't saved over it. But I don't think you're going to need that very much, so I would say don't worry about it. The eraser tool does exactly what it says. It erases stuff. And Photoshop now, see what it's doing? Whenever I hover over a tool, it's giving me like a little quick movie about what it does. This is kind of a handy new feature that they've been doing the past couple of versions where it'll quickly tell you what the tool does. So that's always informative. So yeah, the eraser tool, wow, that's a big brush. It'll just straight up erase stuff, and it works very similar to like a paintbrush or something else, where you just right now my opacity set really low. I'm going to take the opacity up to 100. See, I can just straight up erase Green Arrow if I want to, erase sections of him. Or you can get some cool effects like, let's say I want to make him look like he's coming out of the explosion. Or yeah, like let's say this back leg here, or being harmed by it. Yeah, I guess he could be being disintegrated or something. He's got a high tolerance for pain. He's not really showing it. But let me take my brush up a little bit bigger. I'm going to take the opacity back down to where it was, like in the 20s. Come on, Ollie. Whoops. Now if I just start clicking gradually, see how it's erasing but not completely? Yeah, so it looks like he's kind of stepping out of the explosion a little bit, like. So, you can do some cool kind of effects with that. All right, so that's the eraser tool. And again, it works the same way as the brush tools. You can change the size with the bracket keys, bigger, smaller. You can go up here to the options. You can change the mode from brush to pencil to block. You can play with the opacity. You can play with all this other stuff up here. You can go from, all the same brush presets work with the eraser. So you can use fancy shape brushes with it if you want. Again, you probably won't need to. All right, the gradient tool, we already went over that. It's also bundled with the paint bucket tool, which, you might have a use for. The paint bucket tool, it will also fill an area really quickly. So let's go back. Let me zoom out here a little bit. Another way to fill something really quickly, I'm going to go back down to my background copy. I'm going to select, with the magic wand, I'll go back and select that, create a new layer, go back to my paint bucket tool, pick a different color, like red, hit OK. Now if I just click inside that selection, oh, I got to drag the layer up above. See that? It'll automatically just fill. Ah, it's doing it again. Stay up there. Or if I switch it to yellow, it'll fill it with yellow. Okay, so it'll fill a whole area, either enclosed in an outline or within a selection. So instead of doing edit fill, you can also do the paint bucket. All right, blur, sharpen, and smudge. These are kind of handy. Let's deselect this. Let's bring in another image here. Let's do, again, and I'm not doing file open with these. I'm just kind of bringing them in this way. Yeah, that's from something else. I don't know why that's in there, but it's fine. All right, let's do the villains thing here. Yeah. Yeah, I think his name was actually Zebra Man. He's an old. See, this cartoon uses really old, obscure villains from like the old comics, which is kind of why I like it. These are like old villains from the 50s and 40s that they use like once and never used again. So they're kind of bizarre. All right, so blur tool is basically what it says. If you, let me enlarge this so you can see it. If you need to blur something, you simply click on it and just keep doing it. See how he's, I don't know if you can tell, but he's getting more and more blurry. So if you want to get a certain effect, like you want to blur something in the background or whatever, let me zoom in on that so you can see it. Because it's Batmite. If you've seen the cartoon, see how that's all blurry now? So before and after. That's all the blur tool does. Bundled with it is the sharpen tool. The sharpen tool does the opposite of blur. Sharpen makes things crisper. So if I go in on Riddler here and really start, again, this you might not be able to tell, but it's actually making it more crisp. It's actually overdoing it. You see how it's overexposing it when you do it too much, and it's making it all white and weird looking, like he's got some kind of skin disease or something. All right. Okay. So that's the sharpen tool. And then finally, the smudge tool just makes things look like finger painting. So I can go in here on Joker. And again, I don't know why you would need to use this, but whoa. So you keep doing this and it starts to, make it look like wet paint or something.